Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the A to Z Poll podcast. It's been a couple weeks. I missed you guys. I haven't seen you in a while, but here we are back. Bowl season has ended, and we are well into the college football playoffs. We got some exciting semifinal matchups that we will talk about in this episode, as well as some other stuff. So. Before we get into the agenda of today's episode, if you like this kind of content, if you like college football, go subscribe, leave a comment, tell me your thoughts. I'm wrong often, so tell me that, and just let me know what you're thinking. That being said, let's get into the that's enough shilling, and let's get into the agenda for today. So, first thing that we are going to talk about, step one, is what does it mean for the SEC being almost entirely knocked out, and especially the old SEC, as in, not Texas and Oklahoma? Um, what does that mean for that kind of that like power two term that I've heard be thrown around several times? Um, and how do we move on? How do we move forward from here? Assessing preseason and assessing, future playoff agendas. Uh, then kind of my thoughts on bowl season. I have a couple things, I'd like to share about it. Just kind of my thoughts on how, to evaluate bowl season, how to watch it, how to appreciate bowl season. And then finally, we're gonna go through these two semifinal matchups and we're gonna just see the predictions, see what I think. Not that I've been super right this whole time, but I've been right about a couple things. And you guys should absolutely let me know when I'm not. So, starting off strong, the SEC and the Power Two term, right? It was kind of coming into this year, especially with the playoff format, the new playoff format, and with what happened last year with Alabama and Florida State, kind of a notion that the SEC and the Big Ten are better than every other conference. And while I think there is some truth to that, at the top end, I think looking through the rest of the conferences, it's just not that cut and dry. I also do think that the power two or or G8 terms are pretty very dismissive of the ACC and the Big 12. Two conferences that absolutely are competing in the national spotlight, and one potential targeting call away from being represented in the semifinals and zero from the SEC. Uh, that being said, I think that the SEC being knocked out is actually a very good thing for the parity of college football. I think at this point, you had round one, right? You saw SMU get blown up by Penn State. Lane Kiffin was all over the place, getting bodied on Twitter, but also whining on Twitter about how, he should the Ole Miss should have been in because they're in the SEC and it's the best teams, not the most deserving, blah 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 this, blah 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 that. It was funny seeing him get ratioed, especially by the community notes where it just says maybe don't lose to Kentucky. But I think that it's things like that that will now be more silenced, seeing as, schools like Georgia lost to, a non-conference school, like Notre Dame, who many, including myself, were not very high on in the beginning of the season, or especially in the beginning of the playoffs. Now, do I think that the SEC is bad? No. I mean, they're still very good at, very good. I just think that if we're talking about the premier conference of college football right now, it's probably the Big Ten, and I do think there's a lot more parity between the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the ACC. Pretty much my thoughts on that. Um, and frankly, if we could have, I mean, the best thing I think for parity at this point would probably be Notre Dame winning. Um, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. We have a lot to talk about in between then. Uh, the second point, the second thing we're going to talk about today is bowl season. This is going to be a relatively short episode. I think it's not going to be one of those 40-minute monsters that uh where I go through everybody's top 25. We're just gonna talk about a couple things on the mind, and we're not really gonna go into like transfers and things like that yet. There's a whole nother transfer season. We'll have plenty of off season to talk about it. But bowl season, right? I love bowl season. It's love the random matchups. Love, how some players get to see the field where they might never have seen the field outside of this. It's a great showcase for player skills next year. It's a great showcase for the upcoming transfer portal. I think that this is, bowl season's fun. It's good. It's a good time, and it makes, some of the teams feel like they have can have a successful season without winning the national title. And I think with 136, soon to be more FBS teams, you gotta have something to strive for that's not a national title on a year in and year out basis. That being said, there's a couple things that I've just seen people mention, seen people do. Um, that I think is a little ridiculous. So number one is forcing players through NIL or withholding NIL payments until they play in a bowl game. Now, if you sign an NIL deal with someone and you say, okay, in this deal, it's contingent on me playing in the bowl game. Cool. You signed that contract. That's good for you. But I believe it was Cam Newton who was saying that they should make, like these schools, right? Like, for example, I guess the one I'm most familiar with would be West Virginia's and the Mountaineer Trust Fund, the Country Roads Trust Fund, where it would say something like that, right? Where it's like a fan donated to pot to pay players would, withhold payments unless you play, or like large quantities or percentages of the payment until you play in the bowl game. And I think that's kind of ridiculous. Um, Transfer portal reasons why, NFL prospectal reasons why, the fact that kind of at the end of the day, it's a meaningless game. I mean, like you can have school pride in it, but it's not a conference game. It's not a regular season game, and it's not a playoff game. It's a relatively meaningless game. They're fun, they're lighthearted generally, and I think that forcing players to play in them if they opt out is just not something that we should be doing. Would it be fun if all the players played and we actually did get to see, you know, uh the top two, or like the best of these teams play each other? Yeah, that would probably be fun, but not at the expense of player health, I think. That being said, with opt-outs, with things like that, I think that I've seen too many people look at this and say, well, all these teams are losing in the, in their bowl games. All these teams are like from just a specific conference are losing, or all these ones are winning. This is bad. I don't think that we should be taking that much of a stake in how these games go. I think we should recognize individual performances and, you know, be like, oh, that guy could be good next year. That guy, if he enters the transfer portal, will be like, take notice of good things like that. But I think that team generalizations are just not things that you should be looking at in the bowl games. That's not what the bowl games are about. When I say how to watch bowl games, I I mean, I'm not telling you, you should be eating pretzels instead of popcorn while you're watching them. I'm just saying with the way that you're judging, or the way that people judge players and they judge the game, it's not the same atmosphere as your normal conference game, right? I think that everybody just needs to take a step back from bowl season and take it just a little less seriously. Obviously, unless you're in the playoffs, then take it the most serious and make a fool out of yourself in front of your friends and family when your team doesn't do well. Alrighty. And that brings us to our third point, which I guess will be our longest point, I assume. Um, but that's going to be my predictions and breakdowns of the semifinals of the playoffs. So I'm going to do the one that I think is easier first. And that's going to be Texas versus Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. I think that Texas loses this game. I think their star power just is yet to shine through, and just the way that Ohio State is playing. They're finally playing like that team that I predicted them to play as, and that when I preseason ranked them number one. I think that Texas right now is kind of lucky to be here, and if they, happen to have faced almost anyone else in the first round outside of, let's see, probably Indiana, SMU, or maybe Tennessee. I don't know. Tennessee's a tough one. They're not, or I guess outside, I think Clemson, they're not making it this far. I mean, again, like I said earlier, I kind of alluded to earlier, they're one missed call away from mixing this thing entirely. They're one fourth down to Matthew Golden over the top, missed throw or just better covered ball from just simply not being here right now and the SEC completely not being represented. I don't think that Texas's losses to Georgia are even as forgivable anymore with how poorly Georgia played against Notre Dame. And I think that they don't have any quality wins this year. They have like nothing. They have a couple of SEC wins, but they have, almost lost to Vanderbilt. They were super flat for the majority of the game against Oklahoma. I think that Texas, and they almost lost to Arizona State, who, many were considering were just simply not on the same tier as Texas. I think that Texas hasn't had any adversity this season, and that's going to really come back to bite them in a major way. Um, on the other side, I think Ohio State, like I said, is playing incredible football right now. I think Will Howard is playing a relatively mistake-free brand of football. And I think that the creativity that, Bill O'Brien and not Bill O'Brien, that Chip Kelly and Ryan Day are putting together is crazy and is going to be way more far superior than what Arizona State could put on the field. As good, and not to minimize what Cam Skattebo did, the running back tandem of Quinshon Judkins and TreVeyon Henderson is pretty unmatched. I mean, I feel like we're really forgetting what Quinshon Judkins did his last two seasons at Ole Miss, and that he was the number one running back in the country coming into this season, and he was the number one running back in the country coming into last season. I mean, he ended up being at the end of the year. I think that Texas is going to absolutely have their hands full. Their only hope in this, in my opinion, is if their defensive line can outplay Ohio State's offensive line. I That being said, Ohio State, like I said, has played ridiculous, and they already beat what was, in my opinion, the best defense in the country when they played Tennessee, and they beat them bad, and they put up a lot of points on that team. I think that Texas wins this handily. Uh, I think Ohio State wins this handily over Texas, and I think that they're going to compete for a national title. Game two. This has been, I think, the trickiest game to pick in all of the playoffs so far. In the first corner, you have Penn State, which has seemingly the easiest path to get to the semifinals of anybody still here. And you have Notre Dame, which is a team that I have now counted out in the first and second round. I think that Riley Leonard has played like a man possessed, and his arm has really opened up a whole world of possibilities, especially for like Jeremiah Love, who's also gone pretty insane, and Fajon really stepping up as well. I think that this Notre Dame team has really had a fire lit under them, and I think that I'm finally willing to look past that NIU loss at the beginning of the year, especially with what they were. I mean, double-digit wins against. I mean, first Indiana, everyone's like, okay, Indiana, yeah, they had a good record, but should they have been here? But then doing it to Georgia is a completely different story and a completely different thing in its own right. They looked in control of that game. They looked good. Their defense played physical. They got physical. They were a very, very good team. And I actually think that Marcus Freeman has done an excellent job, but that I think that the NIU loss might have actually been one of the best things that happened to this team, and that the fire just simply would not be as hot underneath them if they never lost to a really, really just not good team. I think that since then, that has been the catalyst of their hard work and what they put in this far thus far. And I've chosen against them for a couple rounds now. Uh, but I think that, their magical run just isn't quite over yet. And I have Notre Dame, uh, I guess, upsetting Penn State. Look, Penn State, they've looked pretty surgical on their offense. Their defense has played a really, really good ground and pound, like anti-ground and pound style, right? They've gotten big, they've gotten physical, but they're not bigger than Georgia. And Georgia got very out physicaled by Notre Dame. I've been wrong several times, but my official prediction for the college football playoff national championship is Ohio State versus Notre Dame. If it goes the other way, it goes the other way. And you should absolutely let me know if I'm wrong in the comments. But as of now, and for the reasons I have laid out, that is what I think. Alrighty, thank you for sticking with me this far through the episode. Again, make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment, and go watch some football this weekend. Bye bye.